The wind hit Haven's Rest like a fist. It screamed through the dry grass and rattled the tin roofs until you'd swear the whole town was about to lift off the ground. Dust devils danced down the main street, little ghosts of grit and grime. This wasn't a place you passed through. This was a place you ended up. And Lark Monroe had just ended up. She stepped off the stagecoach holding a bundle like it was the only thing keeping her from blowing away. Her boots were scuffed down to the leather, her dress was more wrinkle than fabric, and her bonnet was tied so tight it must have hurt. She stood there for a second, a tiny figure against a huge, empty sky, and took it all in. Another town, another set of staring eyes. She'd run out of road. This was it. In her bundle was a dented pot, a few clothes, and her mother's Bible. Hope wasn't part of the cargo. She was here for one thing: work. A couple of townsfolk stopped to get a good look. They didn't have to say a word. Their eyes did the talking. A stranger in Haven's Rest was a piece of meat to be inspected. Lark felt their gaze like a physical weight and clutched her bundle tighter. She was used to it. Too skinny. Too quiet. Not worth the trouble. Her aunt's voice was still bouncing around in her head. Time you find your own way, girl. That was 3 months and 1,000 miles ago. Since then, her prayers had gotten shorter and her hunger had gotten sharper. She pushed open the door to the general store, a little bell announcing her arrival. The place smelled of coffee, leather, and something metallic, like gun oil. A man behind the counter looked up, his eyes hard with suspicion, before he forced a polite smile. "Help you?" he grunted. Lark's voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I'm looking for work. I can cook, I can clean, I can make a chicken last a week, and I don't eat much myself. Just need a roof." The storekeeper chewed on that for a second. Not much hiring going on. He tapped a pencil on his ledger, his eyes flicking over her worn-out dress. "You might try Creed, though." He paused, and his voice dropped low, like he was telling a secret he shouldn't. "August Creed. Got a big ranch east of here." The air in the store suddenly felt heavy. "Lost his wife about a year back," the man continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "Folks say he ain't been right since. Doesn't talk. Never smiles. Big fella. Mean as a snake if you look at him wrong." He shrugged. "But a man like that, a place that big, he's gotta eat, even if he's too stubborn to admit he needs help." "Where can I find him?" Lark asked, ignoring the cold dread creeping up her spine. The storekeeper looked like he regretted even bringing it up. "He'll be in. You'll know him when you see him. You can't miss a man who looks like he could wrestle the devil and win." Lark thanked him and went back outside, sitting on the edge of the boardwalk to wait. The sky was turning a sick, greenish color. A storm was coming. She didn't wait long. She heard him before she saw him, the slow, heavy beat of a horse's hooves on the hard-packed dirt. Then he came into view, and the storekeeper wasn't kidding. August Creed was built like a mountain. His shoulders were so wide they blocked out the sun. He swung off his horse, and the ground seemed to groan under his boots. He stalked into the store without even a glance in her direction. Her chance was slipping away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she stood up, took a deep breath, and followed him inside. She stopped right behind him, a small bird in the shadow of a hawk. "Mr. Creed?" He turned, and the air rushed out of her lungs. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, and they looked right through her, seeing every hungry day, every mile she'd walked. His face was a mask of stone. "I'm looking for work," she said, the words tumbling out before her courage could desert her. "I can cook. I won't be a burden." He just stared. The clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. The whole world held its breath. "Don't need company," he finally rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. He started to turn away, but Lark didn't move. "I'm not asking for company," she said, a new sharpness in her voice. "I'm asking for a kitchen. I work hard and I keep to myself. Your boy. He'll eat better with me there. That stopped him. He turned back, and his gaze pinned her to the floor. How do you know about my boy? I don't, she said softly. But I know a house that's been missing a woman's touch, and I know a man who's been carrying a heavy load all by himself. The silence stretched on. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain lashing against the windows. Creed looked at her, then down at the sack of flour in his hands. He dropped it on the counter with a heavy thud. Be at the wagon, he said. You cook, you clean, you stay out of my way. And you don't ask questions. Understand? Lark nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As they stepped outside, the street had turned to mud. He untied his horse, gave her and her little bundle a quick look. That all you got? She nodded again. He grunted, then swung into the saddle and offered her a hand. His palm was rough as bark and swallowed her hand completely. She let him pull her up behind him. As they rode out of town, the rain washing the dust from the air, she felt something inside her uncoil. She wasn't welcome, not really. But she wasn't on the outside looking in anymore. She was moving. And as they crested a hill and she saw the ranch for the first time, a dark, sagging house against the stormy sky, a shiver went down her spine. This wasn't just a house. It was a tomb. And she had a terrible feeling she'd just been invited to the funeral. The ranch was worse up close. Fences were down, the barn door hung on by a single hinge, and the house itself looked like it was holding its breath, waiting for the wind to finally knock it down. August Creed swung off the horse and stalked up the groaning porch steps without a word. The front door screeched open, revealing a room swallowed by shadows. Dust coated everything like a fine layer of gray snow. A cold fireplace stared out like a dead eye. Plates were stacked by the sink, and a pair of muddy boots lay abandoned in the middle of the floor. This place wasn't just neglected. It was drowning in sorrow. Small room off the kitchen is yours, Creed grunted, his voice flat and empty. Breakfast at dawn, supper at sundown. I'll pay you at the end of the week, if you're still here. I'll be here, Lark said, the words a promise to herself more than to him. Just then, a small sound came from a darkened hallway. A little boy peered around the corner. His eyes were huge in his small face, and his thumb was halfway to his mouth. He looked like a frightened ghost. Lark crouched down slowly. Hello, she said softly. You must be Silas. The boy just stared, his little body tense. Go wash up, Creed ordered from across the room, and the boy vanished like smoke. Lark's heart ached. The silence in this house had infected the child, too. She went to the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Pumping water, scrubbing the table, sweeping the floors. With every stroke of the broom, she felt like she was fighting back against the darkness. By the time August came in from the barn, the smell of onions and simmering stew had replaced the scent of dust and decay. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes moving from the pot on the stove to the clean floor, then to her. He didn't say a word. They ate at opposite ends of the long table, the silence stretching between them. But this silence was different. It was filled with the smell of food, the warmth of the stove. It wasn't as empty. Silas crept in halfway through, climbing into a chair and watching her with those huge, haunted eyes. When she handed him a piece of bread, his small fingers brushed against hers, and it felt like the first real thing she'd touched all day. Later, after the dishes were washed, she explored. The pantry was nearly bare. A little flour, some beans, some salt pork. It wasn't much to work with. As she wandered down the hall, she noticed one door was shut tight, while another was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her. She pushed it open. The room was filled with shelves, and in the corner sat a small wooden chest. She knelt and lifted the dusty lid. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside were tiny baby clothes, a little bonnet, a quilt sewn with impossibly small stitches. The room smelled faintly of lavender. This was the heart of the house's sadness. This was a room for a baby that never came, or one that didn't stay long. She closed the lid gently and backed out of the room, a new, heavier silence settling over her. That night, lying on her cot, she listened to the house groan and the coyotes howl. This place wasn't just mourning a wife, it was mourning something else, something smaller. She finally understood. August Creed hadn't hired a cook. He'd hired someone, anyone, to stand between him and the ghosts. The next morning, Lark was up before the sun, the smell of baking bread filling the cold kitchen. Silas appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. She held out a small piece of dough. He hesitated, then shuffled forward and took it. His small hands worked the dough, clumsy but determined. For the first time, a tiny smile touched his lips. It was like seeing a flower bloom in a desert. When Creed walked in, he froze, staring at his son, at the bread, at her. A flicker of something crossed his face, surprise, maybe even pain, but it was gone in an instant. He sat at the table and said nothing, but when she put the fresh bread in front of him, he ate 3 slices. Later that day, a woman from town, a Mrs. Dawes, stopped by with a parcel of sugar. Her eyes darted everywhere, taking in the clean kitchen, the smell of food, the quiet boy playing on the floor. "Didn't think Creed would ever let anyone in this house again," she said, her voice dripping with curiosity. She leaned closer. "You be careful, dear. Folks around here have long memories. They say that wife of his, her death wasn't as simple as all that. They say this house has a habit of swallowing people up." The woman's words were like poison darts, and they stuck in Lark's mind long after she left. That night, she watched Creed from the kitchen window. He was standing by the barn, staring out at the endless prairie, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. But was it just grief he was carrying? Or was it guilt? Later, as she banked the fire for the night, she saw him standing in the hallway, his hand hovering over the doorknob of the closed room, the one with the baby clothes. He stood there for a long time, his shadow a giant twisted thing on the wall. Then he turned and went outside, leaving the door and its secrets untouched. Lark stood alone in the quiet kitchen, the fire popping behind her. The woman's warning echoed in her ears. This house has a habit of swallowing people up. And for the first time, Lark wondered if she was here to save this family, or if she was the next one to be devoured. The house started to breathe again, slowly. Lark scrubbed and baked and mended, and with each small act, she pushed back the shadows. Sunlight, streaming through clean windows, no longer looked out of place. The constant oppressive silence began to break, filled now with the scrape of a fork, the sizzle of a pan, or the soft thud of Silas's wooden blocks as he built lopsided towers on the floor. August noticed. He never said a word, but she could feel his eyes on her as she worked. His silence was changing. It was less like a wall and more like a space he was slowly, cautiously letting her into. One evening, a fierce rainstorm hit, the kind that makes you feel like the world is ending. The roof started leaking in the hall. "Get a cloth," August grunted, grabbing a lantern. They climbed into the dusty, cramped attic together. Rain hammered on the roof, just inches above their heads. In the flickering lantern light, he showed her how to patch the leak with tar. His large, rough hand guided hers, and for a moment, their shoulders brushed. The air in the small space was thick with the smell of rain, dust, and something else, something unspoken that passed between them. It was the closest they had ever been. When they climbed back down, the storm was easing. She found Silas curled up by the fire, fast asleep, his head resting against his father's leg. August was just sitting there, staring into the flames, one hand resting gently on his son's back. The sight was so tender it made her heart ache. But peace was a fragile thing. When they went to town for supplies, The whispers followed them like a pack of dogs. Mrs. Dawes cornered Lark by the flour barrels. "Heard some things, miss," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Heard the last girl who worked for Creed just vanished, packed up in the middle of the night, or so he says. The sheriff came out but couldn't find a thing out of place." A cold knot formed in Lark's stomach. "I'm just here to cook," she said, her voice tight. "That's what the other one said, too," Mrs. Dawes replied, a smug little smile on her face. The ride home was tense. August must have sensed her unease. The silence was back, but this time it was the old kind, the heavy, suffocating kind. That night, Lark couldn't sleep. The house groaned around her. Was it just the wind, or was it the ghost of the girl who had vanished? She thought about the locked room, the one he never opened, the one from his wife. Was there a connection? The next week, Silas started humming. A small, tuneless sound, but it was the first time she'd heard him make a sound that wasn't a cry. It was a victory. August heard it too. That evening, he found her reading to Silas by the fire. He just stood in the doorway, watching them, his face hidden in the shadows. But she could feel his gaze, intense and unreadable. The whispers in town grew into a roar. A ranch hand from a neighboring spread rode up one afternoon, a nasty grin on his face. "Word is you're playing house out here, Creed," he sneered. "Better be careful. Some folks think you got away with something once. They won't let it happen again." August's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. He just turned his back, his shoulders rigid. The man laughed and rode away. That night, after Silas was asleep, Lark found August on the porch, a dark shape against the starry sky. "If you want me to leave, just say so," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I won't be the cause of shame for you." He turned slowly. In the pale moonlight, his face looked carved from granite. "I didn't hire you to leave," he said, his voice low and rough. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a comfort. It was just a fact. But it was enough. She stayed on the porch after he went inside, the cold air biting at her skin. She was no stranger to leaving. But the thought of walking away from this place, from the quiet boy and the broken man, felt like leaving a part of herself behind. She went back inside and saw August standing in the hall again, staring at the closed door. Not the nursery this time, but the other one. His wife's room. His hand was on the knob, but he didn't turn it. He just stood there, a prisoner outside his own jail cell. Lark knew then. The whispers, the warnings, the vanished girl, the locked room. It was all connected. This house wasn't just haunted by grief. It was haunted by a secret. And August Creed was standing guard, daring anyone to uncover it. The storm that had been brewing wasn't in the sky anymore. It was inside these four walls, and it was about to break. One night, Lark was cleaning the main room, long after August and Silas were asleep. She was sweeping near the big stone hearth, a place she'd cleaned 100 times. But this time, her broom snagged on a loose stone at the base. Curious, she knelt down and worked it free. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. Her heart started to pound. Reaching inside, her fingers brushed against something small and wooden. It was a box, not much bigger than her hand, beautifully carved, but covered in a thick layer of soot. She pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single silver locket. It was tarnished with age and heat. She clicked it open. On one side was a miniature portrait of a woman she didn't recognize. Not the woman from the photograph on the mantelpiece, who she assumed was Creed's late wife. This woman was different, younger, with a defiant look in her eyes. On the other side, an inscription was barely visible beneath the tarnish. She took it to the lamp, polishing it with the hem of her apron. The words made her blood run cold. My Lark. Forever. Her name. It was her name. But how? She had never been here before. Her mother was dead, and she'd never known her father. Who was this woman? Why did she have a locket with Lark's name on it, hidden in this house of sorrow? She snapped the locket shut, her mind reeling. The vanished girl Mrs. Dawes had mentioned. Was it possible? Had she been here before and somehow forgotten? No, that was impossible. Then another thought, even more terrifying, took root. This locket wasn't for her. It was for another Lark, her mother. Had her mother been the girl who disappeared? She had to know what was in the locked room. The secrets of this house were now her secrets, too. The next day, while August was out mending the fences on the far side of the property, she found an old set of keys hanging on a dusty hook in the pantry. Her hands trembled as she tried them, one by one, in the lock of the forbidden door. The third key turned. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent house. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. It wasn't a bedroom. It was an office. A thick layer of dust covered a large wooden desk, a bookshelf, and a leather chair. It felt like a room frozen in time. On the desk, a leather-bound journal lay open, a pen resting beside it, as if the writer had just stepped away for a moment. She picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. It was a diary. The diary of August's wife, Elspeth. She began to read. The first entries were full of hope and love for her husband, for their new life on the ranch. But then, the tone began to change. August is growing distant, one entry read. He spends hours locked in here, staring at the wall. He talks in his sleep. He says a name. Lark. Lark's hands went numb. She kept reading, her eyes flying across the pages. Elspeth wrote of finding strange things, a small carved bird, a woman's shawl that wasn't hers, hidden in the barn. She wrote of her growing fear, of August's dark moods, of his obsession with the past. He found out I was searching, a later entry said, the handwriting now jagged and rushed. He confronted me. He said I would never understand. He said this land has a claim on his soul, a debt that must be paid. The final entry was just a few words, scrawled across the bottom of the page. He knows I know about the well. God help me. The well. Lark remembered seeing an old stone-capped well at the edge of the property, overgrown with weeds. What did it have to do with anything? She dropped the journal on the desk, a terrible theory forming in her mind. August hadn't just lost a wife. He had been hiding a secret about another woman, a woman named Lark, her mother, and his wife had discovered it. Was that why she had died? Had she fallen, as the town believed? Or had she been silenced? Lark backed out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was no longer just a cook. She was a witness, a detective, maybe even a judge. The silence of the house was no longer about grief. It was about a crime. And the ghost that haunted this ranch wasn't August's wife. It was her mother. Lark felt trapped. The ranch, once a refuge, now felt like a cage. August's silence was no longer sad, it was menacing. Every time he looked at her, she wondered if he saw her, or the woman whose name she shared. She had to get to that well. She waited for a day when August took Silas into town for supplies, a rare occasion. The moment their wagon disappeared over the horizon, she ran. The well was even farther than she remembered, tucked away in a grove of dying cottonwoods. It was old, the stones crumbling, and capped with a heavy wooden lid that looked like it hadn't been moved in decades. It took all her strength, but she managed to pry the lid open. The air that rose from the darkness below was stale and cold. She lit the lantern she'd brought, tied it to a rope, and lowered it into the blackness. The light swayed, illuminating damp, moss-covered stones, and then it illuminated something else. At the bottom of the well, tangled in debris, was a human skeleton. Lark screamed, scrambling back from the edge, her hands flying to her mouth. It was her. It had to be. Her mother. The girl who had vanished. She hadn't run away. She had been put here. August hadn't just hired her by chance. He knew who she was. He must have. Was this some kind of twisted penance, or was he luring her into the same trap? She scrambled back to the house, her mind a whirlwind of terror. She had to leave, now. She threw her few belongings into her bundle, her hands shaking so violently she could barely tie the knot. But as she reached for the door, she stopped. Silas. She couldn't just leave the boy here with a monster. Her eyes fell on the small wooden box she had found in the hearth. The locket was inside, but there was something else she had overlooked in her shock. Tucked beneath the velvet lining was a tiny, folded piece of paper. She carefully unfolded it. It was a note, the handwriting small and neat. If you are reading this, I am gone. Do not trust the man with the kind eyes. Trust the one who owns the land. The proof is buried with the bird. The man with the kind eyes. That didn't sound like August. The one who owns the land? That was Creed. But the note said not to trust the other one. And what did it mean, buried with the bird? The carved bird Elspeth mentioned in her diary. The bird Silas sometimes played with. Her head was spinning. Nothing made sense. Before she could process it, she heard the sound of the wagon returning. It was too soon. He was back. She shoved the note and the locket into her pocket and forced herself to look calm as August and Silas came through the door. Forgot the salt lick for the cattle, August said, his eyes scanning the room. Did he know? Could he tell she had discovered his secret? That night was torture. Every creak of the house made her jump. She clutched the locket in her hand, the words of the note burning in her mind. Do not trust the man with the kind eyes. Who was it? The storekeeper? The ranch hand who'd taunted them? The next day, the neighboring rancher, Jed, rode over. He had a charming smile and eyes that seemed warm and friendly. He tipped his hat to Lark. "Mornin', ma'am. Just checking on my neighbor after that dry spell." He was the man with the kind eyes. Lark felt a chill despite the heat of the day. He chatted with August for a bit, then turned his smile on Lark. "Must be tough living out here with old Grumbles," he said with a wink. "If you ever need a friend, you just let me know." As he rode away, Lark watched him, the note's warning screaming in her head. August was watching him too, his expression dark and unreadable. The pieces were starting to shift, forming a new, more terrifying picture. August wasn't the monster. He was the guardian. He was protecting the secret, but it wasn't his secret to keep. It was his to avenge. She had to find that bird. She searched Silas's room while he was outside. It wasn't there. She checked the toy box, under the bed, everywhere. It was gone. Had August hidden it, or did Silas have it with him? Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the prairie, Lark saw Silas playing near the barn. He was digging in the dirt with a stick, and next to him, half buried in the soil, was the small carved wooden bird. The proof is buried with the bird. She walked over slowly, her heart pounding. "What have you got there, Silas?" He looked up at her, his big eyes solemn. He held up the bird. It was beautifully carved, but its head twisted off. It was a little box. Silas opened it and tipped it over. A small brass key fell into his palm. It wasn't a key to a box. It was a key to a post office box. Just then, August came out of the barn. He saw the key in Silas's hand, and his face went pale. He looked at Lark, and for the first time, she saw not menace, but pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes. He knew that she knew, and at that exact moment, they all smelled it. Smoke. Lark looked up. On the horizon, a plume of black smoke was rising, thick and fast. It was coming from the east pasture. But this was no lightning strike. The sky was clear. This was deliberate. "Stay with the boy!" August roared, already sprinting for the horses. But Lark knew this was no ordinary fire. It wasn't about the pasture. It was about the house. It was about them. It was about destroying the proof. Jed. It had to be Jed. The man with the kind eyes was trying to burn them all alive. The fire moved with unnatural speed, a roaring wall of orange and black devouring the dry grass. August was a silhouette against the flames, fighting a losing battle. Lark grabbed Silas, her mind racing. The house was their tomb, the fire was the final lock. She had to get the key to safety, but there was nowhere to run. The fire was circling, cutting them off. "Inside!" she screamed to Silas, pulling him toward the house. But the smoke was already pouring from the windows. The front porch was on fire. They were trapped. August galloped back through the inferno, his face black with soot, his eyes wild. "The root cellar!" he yelled, swinging down from his horse. "It's the only chance!" He grabbed Silas and kicked open the heavy wooden doors set into the ground near the kitchen. A blast of cool, earthy air met them. He pushed Silas down the steps, then turned to Lark. "Go!" "Not without you!" she cried, the heat scorching her face. A massive, burning beam from the porch roof crashed down, blocking their path to the cellar. They were cut off. The fire roared around them, a living, breathing monster. They were going to die here. But as the flames licked at the walls of the house, Lark saw something. The old stone well. "The well!" she screamed, pulling August's arm. "There's water!" They scrambled toward it, the heat so intense it was hard to breathe. The wooden lid was already smoldering. Together they heaved it off. Hope surged through her until she looked down. The well was dry, and at the bottom lay the bones of her mother. They were standing on the edge of an open grave. The fire was closing in, the roar deafening. There was no escape. August grabbed her, pulling her close, shielding her body with his own as the flames leaped higher. This was the end. But then, through the smoke, they saw a figure, a man on a horse, riding hard not towards them, but away from the fire. It was Jed, a torch in his hand, his face lit by the flames of his own making, a triumphant sneer twisting his kind features into something hideous. He was the one. He had set the fire. He had killed her mother. He was the devil himself. Suddenly, the ground beneath them groaned. The stones of the old well, weakened by the heat, began to shift. August shoved Lark away just as the edge of the well crumbled, and he fell, tumbling into the darkness, landing with a sickening thud among the bones below. Lark screamed his name, crawling to the edge. He was alive, but his leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. He couldn't climb. The fire was right on top of them, embers raining down into the well. She looked around frantically, her eyes landing on the old rope and bucket. It was their only hope. She threw the rope down, her hands raw and burning. "August, grab on!" He was fading, the smoke filling the well. He shook his head. "Save the boy," he rasped. "The key." "I'm not leaving you," she shrieked, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. She began to pull, her muscles screaming in protest. The rope was old, fraying under the strain. It wouldn't hold, but she had to try. Just as her strength gave out, another pair of hands joined hers on the rope. It was the storekeeper from town, his face grim, followed by other men. They must have seen the smoke. They pulled, and together they hauled August out of the well, his body limp and broken. But the fire was still raging, and Jed was getting away. As the men carried August toward safety, Lark stood, her body trembling with rage. She looked at the key in her hand, then at the retreating figure of Jed. It wasn't over. Not yet. She saw August's horse, panicked but unharmed, its reins tangled in a bush. Without a second thought, she ran to it, untangled the reins, and swung herself into the saddle. She was no rider, but fury was a powerful teacher. She kicked the horse into a gallop, chasing the devil through a field of fire and smoke. Jed heard her coming. He turned in his saddle, his kind eyes now wide with shock and fury. He spurred his horse on, but August's stallion was faster, stronger. Lark closed the distance, the wind whipping tears and ash across her face. She was no longer a scared girl looking for work. She was vengeance. They raced across the burning prairie, two figures silhouetted against a hellish landscape. Jed pulled a pistol, firing wildly behind him. A bullet grazed Lark's arm, the pain sharp and hot, but she barely felt it. She leaned low over the horse's neck, urging it on. She caught up to him, grabbing the reins of his horse, pulling them both to a crashing halt. They fell, tumbling to the charred earth. Jed was up first, the gun still in his hand. He pointed it at her chest, his face a mask of desperation. "It's over, girl," he spat. "You should have stayed out of it." "You killed her," Lark whispered, her voice hoarse. "My mother. You threw her down that well." A flicker of confusion, then recognition, dawned in his eyes. "Lark, of course, I should have known." He laughed, a chilling, ugly sound. "She was just like you, too curious for her own good. She found out my father cheated the Creeds out of their water rights. She was going to expose us. I couldn't let that happen, and when Elspeth started snooping around, well, accidents happen." He smiled. "This land should have been mine." "It never will be." A voice like thunder boomed behind him. It was August. He was leaning on the storekeeper, his face pale with pain, but his eyes burned with a righteous fire. He held an old rifle, his hand steady despite his injuries. The other townsmen were there too, their faces hard and unforgiving in the firelight. They had heard everything. Jed's face crumpled. He swung the pistol toward August, but it was too late. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the burned-out fields. Jed dropped his gun, clutching his shoulder, and fell to his knees. Justice, swift and final, had arrived. The aftermath was a scene of devastation. The house was gone, reduced to a smoking skeleton. The ranch was a blackened wasteland. But as the sun rose, casting a pale, hesitant light over the destruction, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The key from the bird led to a post office box containing the original deed to the land and the water rights, along with a confession from Jed's father. The whole sordid story came out, and the town, once so quick to whisper about August, now rallied around him. Jed was taken away, his reign of terror finally over. They buried the bones from the well under the largest surviving oak tree, marking the grave with a simple stone. Lark. Mother. Beloved. August stood beside her, leaning on his crutches, his hand finding hers. Silas stood between them, holding both their hands, a small, unbroken link in a chain of sorrow. "She would have been proud of you," August said, his voice thick with emotion. "What now?" Lark asked, looking at the ruins of their home. "Now," he said, turning to face her, his storm-gray eyes clear for the first time. "We rebuild." And they did. With the help of the town, they built a new house on the ashes of the old one. It was smaller, simpler, but filled with a light the old house had never known. The rains came, and slowly, impossibly, tiny green shoots began to push their way through the blackened earth. The land was healing, and so were they. One evening, months later, they sat on the porch of their new home, watching Silas chase fireflies in the twilight. The silence between them was no longer heavy with secrets, but full of a quiet, comfortable peace. August took her hand. His palm, once so rough and foreign, now felt like home. "Lark," he said, his voice soft, "I know I have no right to ask, but this house, this boy, I don't want to do this without you. Stay, not as my cook, as my wife." Lark looked at his face, at the lines of hardship and sorrow that were finally softening. She looked at the boy, his laughter echoing in the dusk. She looked at the land, scarred but alive, stretching out before them. She had come to this place with nothing, a ghost herself, and in the heart of the fire she had found everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They say that from the deepest darkness the brightest light can emerge. They say that out of the ashes new life can grow. For a man trapped by the ghosts of the past and a woman with no future, a fire destroyed everything they had, only to give them everything they ever needed. What do you think is harder, facing the ghosts of your past or building a future from nothing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of survival and second chances moved you, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more tales you won't soon forget.